Hey everyone, you're listening to another episode of the Divergent Conversations podcast, Stumbling Over My Words. I'm your co-host Patrick Casale, joined today by
Dr. Neff.
and we are going to talk about autistic emotions. And Megan, you brought this up before we started
Mhm.
recording, so why autistic emotions?
Well, in our most recent podcast, when we were talking about therapy and some of our experience with therapy, I was struck by, both of us talking about how intrusive it felt when people asked how we were feeling or where in our bodies. And I just think it's a really interesting topic. I know I have really complex relationship to emotions. And so I just thought it'd be really interesting to dive into the autistic experience of emotions. Again, knowing there's obviously a diversity of how we all experience it, but we can talk about our experiences.
Yeah, so I agree with you, and I know we brought it up a lot when we were talking about finding ND affirming therapists and what it feels like to be in
Mm.
therapy, questions that are not appreciated or that don't really land or go over well. So when we're thinking about, the complex conversation around autistic emotion, where does your mind go? What are you
Mhm.
thinking about?
I think the first place my mind goes is a memory, actually. So I think it was my either my first or my second session with the therapist I mentioned on our last podcast, the one I worked with for 4.5 years. Um, and I was nervous going into. I think I'd been on his wait list for like 9 months. So there's whenever you're on a wait list a long time, there's like built up anticipation. And I started talking. I started getting some emotion in my voice, which I hate when. And that's my first tell. I'm not really a crier, but my voice. You can hear it in my voice when I start feeling emotions. So my voice started to shake. I don't even remember what I was talking about. But then I was like, sorry, I hate emotions. And then and I kept talking. And my therapist, like very just patient, curious man. After I stopped whatever rant I was on, he was like, I'm sorry. Did you just say you hate emotions? And here I am, like a psychologist in training in my first therapy with a psychoanalytic therapist. And I somehow, without meaning to disclose this, like said, I hate emotions, which I just find kind of hilarious because I'm a therapist. Emotions are my world, but also very true. Like I, I think I don't like there's some emotions I like, but I do think I have this bias of I don't like feeling hijacked by emotions. I don't like the experience of emotions. I don't like the vulnerability of emotions. I definitely don't like feeling emotions in front of another human. I have a really complicated relationships to emotions, which is just kind of funny because I'm a freaking psychologist.
It's one of those therapist things, right? Like where both can be true. You know how
Hmm.
often we like to throw that fucking phrase out there?
Oh.
But that is true. Um, because I imagine that when you're in the room with someone, you are really attuned to them,
Hmm.
okay? Really absorbing and picking up on their own emotion and their own sensory overload and stimulation and everything that's happening for them. And but that does, yeah, I think the introspective like worldview of like, but I really struggle with this
Hmm.
is really
Hmm.
honest, raw, and that's really true.
Yeah.
Uh,
Yeah.
and
It's
I
way easier to enter someone else's emotions than mine.
Oh yeah, for sure.
Yeah.
It's a lot it's a lot safer to do that.
Hmm. Hmm.
Um, there's a lot less vulnerability in so as well, and I also struggle with what you're saying, like, I don't get it in my throat. Usually, I'll
Hmm.
find myself, like, tearing up, and
Hmm.
my instantaneous reaction is
Mhm,
to, like, close my
mhm,
eyes really hard, and then
mhm,
just it's gone,
mhm.
and the therapist will be like, "What the hell was that?"
That's oh, I like your therapist.
Yeah, she's good, like, so tracking all this stuff, like, and, I think what I'll also feel is, like, if I'm starting to feel, like, water behind my eyes, right? Like, when I'm starting to feel, like, the
Mhm,
that feeling, but my instinct is always to repress and always to dissociate and always to numb, and,
mhm, mhm,
call it childhood trauma mixed with autism, neurodevelopmental stuff going
mhm,
on, but, like, I really have a hard time with that, and also very typically just flat affect, like not showing a
Yeah.
lot,
Yeah.
blank stare a lot of the
Uh-huh.
time. And
Uh-huh.
I think that, for people in our world, I imagine people who are close to us, that can be very challenging as well.
Mhm. Uh-huh. Yeah. Yeah. Absolutely. Absolutely. I mean, we talked this couple episodes ago, we talked about like special interests, and that's when a person becomes animated. Like, I think my effect and my emotions and my face, when I'm talking about a special interest, I can get in my emotions. But outside of that, yeah, I'm pretty flat. I remember seeing a picture of myself. I think I was in seminary at the time or college, and I looked so flat, and someone had taken it. I was like in a classroom. And I was like, "Why do I look like that?" And the person who had taken it was like, "You always look like that." And I was shocked, that and I think if I'm not trying to manipulate my face, like, right now, I'm seeing myself on camera, I'm manipulating my face a little bit, like, super flat.
When that person said that, what started to come up for you around that?
I was kind of I was a little bit horrified because I didn't like how it looked. It looked very serious, it looked very stern almost,
Right.
so and then also I didn't see myself that way, so it was kind of one of those moments of, like, what's happening here?
Yeah. What about like intensity? I
Oh,
think
I'm
that,
intense,
well,
is that what
yeah.
you're asking?
Yeah, that's the word that gets thrown around a lot. Intensity. Like,
Uh-huh,
because you're kind of like, you're flat. You're like just staring into that person's fucking soul
mhm,
essentially. And it's like, but I'm not meaning to do that. It's just how
mhm,
I show up. And it's
mhm,
like very
mhm,
intense. So I think for
mhm,
people who don't know you well or have just met
mhm,
you, it's like, oof, this is a bit
mhm.
of an intimidation, or like this feels uncomfortable to some degree.
It's bare, right? The flat effect, there's, like, a bareness to it, a vulnerability to it that I think can be uncomfortable for a lot of people.
Yeah. Cause I think a lot of people are like, what do I say, or how do I react
Mhm,
in this
mm,
interaction?
yeah,
Um, yeah, I think that if my therapist or someone was to ask me how I'm feeling, most of the time I can't name it. I'm
yeah,
very
yeah,
often like,
same.
how am I feeling?
Uh-huh, yeah.
It's not something I've been thinking about.
Mhm,
Uh, I'm feeling like the way I wish I could put it into words, like the constant feelings of the way I experience living. It's I'm hearing myself talking. Like, what the fuck are you saying? I The way I experience like my day to day is like this constant buzz of anxiety and
mm,
discomfort and
mm,
um feeling unsettled, and just
mm,
like my you I'm even feeling it right now. Like my legs are really tense, and I'm like
mm,
really shifting my ankles a lot of the time, and like I'm
mhm,
just so uncomfortable all the time. And I think
mm.
that's, if you were to ask me how are you feeling, that's how I'm feeling. But that's not a feeling word. Like that's not an emotion. It's just
Right,
like,
it's a sensory
yeah,
uncomfortable. Yeah, yeah.
but that's constant. So like it's like
Uh-huh,
you're living in this constant discomfort,
uh-huh,
sensory hell,
uh-huh.
and then overthinking everything and analyzing everything and absorbing everything. And I guess the emotion is it's fucking exhausting. Like
Mhm.
that's, a word I would use for a feeling word.
Yeah, yeah. You know, um, I wonder if that's part of it. I'm kinda thinking I'm thinking while I'm talking here. Always a fun always a fun dynamic. Um, emotions are a sensory experience, and I wonder if that's part of why a lot of us do shut down emotions is, like, I'm so overwhelmed by my sensory system and sensory experience. There's no way I'm gonna also, like, throw in emotions on top of that,
Yeah.
because it is a sensory experience, and so I think if we're living in a world and we're overwhelmed by our sensory experience already, it actually is kind of an adaptive coping strategy to, like, I'm gonna shut down the emotional experience because 'cause I'm not gonna add to the sensory load.
Right. Cause that would just be way too much,
Mhm. Yeah.
because it already feels like too much a lot of the time.
Mhm.
So how can I possibly then tap into that world as well, and then like
Mm.
try to decipher what the hell is happening for me?
Yeah.
Uh, I think that most people would describe me as like pretty calm and even keeled a lot of the time. Like I don't show highs and lows very often. And like you said, special interests, maybe my energy levels will peak a bit. Maybe my affect will like go up a bit. But honestly, it's pretty low most of the time. Like
Mhm.
I'm a pretty low energy human being. And
Yeah.
me, at least in terms of like what I'm displaying and putting out to the world. But in my mind, I feel like it's going just constant,
Good.
nonstop
Mhm.
thoughts, just overwhelm, anxieties,
Mhm.
panics, like ideas, creativity, like all the stuff. But it's like very, very bare, and it's really not
Mhm.
present or at least visible to the naked
Mhm.
eye.
What do you, because I hear this a lot in autistic people, and I think it's one of the reasons we're often misunderstood in therapy. Like what do you make of, so internally, like you're describing a very agitated, stressful, anxious experience, but people are reading it as calm.
Yeah.
What do you make of that disconnect? And how does it impact you?
I don't know. I think it feels so disjointed or just
Mhm.
not congruent. Like things feel so I think you can often feel misunderstood
Yeah.
because
Yeah.
your experience is not what they're experiencing because of how you're presenting.
Right.
And
Right.
so you may be feeling like really agitated or irritated or stressed, but you're
Mhm.
presenting very flat. And
Mhm.
then you can sometimes, wait, I should not generalize. I can sometimes then get frustrated with the receiving end, the other person, because I'm like, you're not like understanding how I'm experiencing life right now.
Yeah. Yeah.
But I'm also not giving you anything to work with. So it's really not on you to read my
Mhm.
fucking mind.
Uh-huh. Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, that's sort of like double reality. Um, I imagine that adds to a lot of like stress and relationship confusion.
Yeah. I know we've talked about that too. Having, difficulty in building and creating relationships
Hmm.
because it's just a confusing, it feels like not a tornado because that's not the right word. It just feels like very scattered, like everything feels like a blur behind the scenes. It's also, I don't know, it's hard to describe, and I realize that like as I'm saying that, I just think that it feels like there is a lack of congruency or a
Hmm.
like between
Hmm.
inner and outer world.
I really like how you say that, a disconnect between inner and outer world. Yeah, I feel that too.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's hard.
Mhm. It is.
What about for you? Like when we're talking about this, and you've mentioned before just being a high masking human being,
Mhm. Mhm.
uh, does it often feel similarly where like you're presenting one way in certain situations, but
Mhm.
in the inside it feels completely different?
Um, I would say historically, yes. My life has become really small. It's an interesting thing. I think when you have a lot of followers on social media or whatnot, people kind of assume a shiny, big life. Like
Yeah.
I rarely leave my house. I rarely interact with other humans outside of my immediate family and my clients who I see via teletherapy.
Right.
Everyone who knows I'm autistic. Like rarely am I in a space where people don't know I'm autistic.
Sure.
So I experience less of that now. Um, but I experienced it all the time before. But so it is interesting when you were talking about the inside and the outside not matching. Like by default, it's always been like, oh yeah, because of masking, and I do think masking is a part of it. But it feels like more than that when I'm hearing you talk about it, and when I think about it, I don't have language yet for what it is, but it feels like more than masking. It feels like there's also something else, like the way our emotions are displayed, and with the flat effect that you and I both experience. Versus like the agitated inside. Um, I think there's more than masking happening there.
Yeah, I think you're right. I think we've also probably trained our nervous systems so well to
Mhm,
to suppress and repress and like really
mhm,
try hard to disconnect from what's happening. Um,
It's adaptive.
it is adaptive. It is
Yeah.
absolutely.
Disconnect from the too muchness. Yeah.
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 No, I think what you're describing, and you talk about unmasking a lot, and sensory soothing, being around people who know who you are
Mhm.
in these small circles, I imagine allows for a little bit of a reprieve or relief.
Mhm.
Weirdly, like you and I have talked about this. You mentioned Ireland before, and now we're going to go into this
Mhm.
world.
Awesome.
So I think that when you develop a following, you a lot of people can become agoraphobic, um,
Mm.
or at least want to shut out the outside world, even though you've
Mhm.
created the outside world and
Huh.
your
Mhm.
career is kind of dependent on it.
Yeah. Yeah.
Like I often say this all the time. I wish I could just disappear from it. Like I don't
Yeah. Me
enjoy
too. Me too.
the, the parts that I've
Mhm.
created this thing where
Uh-huh.
I have to show up, and
Yeah,
I
your livelihood depends on it now.
yeah. And Megan and I were talking before we were recording. I just got done hosting a retreat in Ireland, and we had 27 other people there that I was hosting and attending to. And I just I think it's become significantly more apparent to me how challenging that is emotionally.
Mhm.
Uh, and I try really hard, like during the initial like talk where we are like introducing ourselves and kind of setting intentions for the event, to just name how I'm experiencing life and how I'm experiencing the sensory overload, and how I'm going to have to walk and like step away more often than I would
Mm.
like to.
Yeah.
Um, and I will also name like, I'm autistic. I have no problem talking about that and saying that. And sometimes in these small gatherings and social situations, I'm just going to have to leave. Like I
Yeah.
cannot
Yeah.
sit here and make small
Mhm.
talk or like
Mhm.
stare at you in your eyes and like attend to you.
Ugh. Yeah.
And you know,
Yeah.
I hope that nobody takes that personally. I say it very transparently with the best of
Mm.
intentions, but I also know that sometimes in action, it may not come across as like
Yeah.
caring as and attuned as I would like it to because of how overwhelmed you become.
Mhm.
And that is a challenge.
Yeah. I'm just thinking about how, like, going to grocery stores or whatnot, or other people's houses was really overwhelming for me as, a young mom when my kids were younger, because I felt like I had to manage me, but I also felt like I had to manage my kids. And I'm just thinking about, like, there's something about when I need to be, like, consciously aware of what other humans are doing. The idea of leading a retreat and, like, also be thinking about like, you're not just in a room with 27 other humans, you're also, like, kind of managing their experience. Oh my gosh. Like, wow. Yeah. No, thank you.
It's a lot. And I think I've realized that I need a significant amount of recharge time in
Mhm.
between. Um, because it's really your system is just so overloaded with like,
Mhm.
okay, you've got to communicate to the vendors. Okay, you've got to
Mhm.
manage, put out these little fires that are happening throughout.
And
Like,
then to be social on top of that,
yeah,
that's the part. Like, if it was just mechanical of like, okay, logistics, da, 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 but then there's people coming up to you, like, talking when you're
right.
in your logistical brain. Yeah.
It's really hard. So I think that, emotionally, there are coping strategies for sure, but a lot of them become unhealthy ones.
Yeah.
As we've talked about, right? I was in Ireland. We have a keg of Guinness in the venue. I'm like, I'm gonna drink the whole time because that's
Mhm.
gonna help me
Mhm.
show up in the way that I need to show up in, and
Yeah.
not just down. Not healthy at all, but certainly a reality for a lot of us. And
Yeah.
um, yeah,
I'm gonna do like the nerdy thing where I pop up into science here a little bit. But so alexithymia, or the difficulty, I actually don't know if I'm saying that word right, which is funny because I talk about it all the time. I've heard it pronounced a few different ways. I say alexithymia. Alexithymia, or the difficulty identifying emotions. Not that uncommon. 1 in 10 people have it in the world, but among autistic people, it's like 50 to 60% of us have it. I have um, at this point, I would say mild to moderate alexithymia because of work I've worked with it. Like I've done work around it to improve it. Um, but those of us with alexithymia are way more likely to do what's called avoidant emotional coping, which is one of the reasons that we're more prone to mental health conditions. So things like drinking, um, numbing out, like all of those, I'm avoiding the emotions. And we were just talking about our physical body, like our neurology that shuts down. Like our neurology has taught us, like, shut down the emotion, shut down the emotion. So it makes sense that then we'd also be drawn to more dissociative ways of coping, more avoidant ways of coping with emotions, which ultimately does not tend to serve people well when we fall into those patterns.
No, it does not. But I like hearing that. That's definitely true for me. And I think, like you mentioned before, trying to figure out why, because it's not just the masking piece, right? And I think, like you said, it's adaptive. It's like potentially life saving in situations, and it's
Mhm.
certainly protective. Um, and I think that, yeah. How often are you in a therapy session or in therapy or, in general where someone's like, okay, we've got to get out of here? Like,
Mm,
my therapist says that to me all the time. She's like, I know you're going to talk about how you think
mm,
about it, but I want to know how you feel about it. And
mm.
ooh,
See,
uh,
sorry, something and I've said this before. I knew I was autistic. I was like, my thoughts are emotional. When I'm describing how I think about it, something, I am feeling so much emotion in that. Or when I'm describing a theory that I like or a philosophy that I like I'm in my feelings. Like right now, just talking, I'm in my feelings. You can probably see it and hear it. So I kind of feel like that's an allistic thing, this whole like separation of thoughts and feelings that personally, if I'm gonna tell you how I'm gonna feel, I am gonna use this.
yeah, absolutely. And then it's also a place of protection too.
So, I mean, I think that's what's tricky, is it can be a defense, and, like, this I think was one of Freud's, right, classic defenses is, kinda intellectualizing.
Yeah.
I've often wondered, like, is that applicable to autistic people? Not that we can't use it as a defense. I think we totally can.
Sure.
I also I don't know, I think we've got more integrated emotion cognitive systems or, um like, I just see that more commonly where when people are describing their thoughts, they are talking about their emotions.
Yeah, I think that makes a lot of sense for sure. And I think you're right. It's an holistic uh, viewpoint to say separate the two.
Yeah.
And for a lot of people who can do that, that's fantastic. I find that very challenging to separate because if I'm putting the energy into talking about how
Mm,
I'm feeling or what's
mhm.
happening for me, like that takes a lot of mental energy to do that.
Yeah,
And
yeah.
I'm not doing it lightly to like dance around
Mhm,
a thing,
mhm,
right? Like this
mhm.
is explaining my process. Like I can already see how hard it is to explain my process. So like it's
Mhm.
a bit more challenging.
What if that's why we're more protective around our words? If because our words are, like, more, like, metabolized combined states, and I realize that I feel like I'm starting to get into, like, autistic people are better than and which I think is a dangerous territory, but, like, I don't like to talk unless I want to talk. Like, I don't like, I'm very, scarce with my words, like, I don't like to talk just to talk. And I think, I don't know, what if what you're saying of like you process your words and you metabolize them before you use them. Maybe there's a more laborious process happening for us around our words.
Yeah, that sounds like that makes sense to me. You're having a lot of profound moments today, these revelations. But I think
I
that
mean, they're just theories. Like let's not this is like just Megan Anna isms theorizing. Um, let's be clear about that.
I'll give Megan more credit than that. But I think that you're right. I think there is because I mean, I think that's why so often we're looking away before we talk, right? Because
Mhm.
we're metabolizing what we want to say. We want to say it in a certain way. We want it to come across in a certain way. But there's a lot of intention that goes into speaking and communicating in
Mhm.
general. And I think that also plays a role in terms of like not wanting to have small talk,
Hmm.
um, not wanting
Yeah.
to have artificial conversation. It's like
Mhm.
there's so much energy that goes into
Yeah.
communication. I don't
And
want to
there's no
waste
point
it
to
on
it.
this stupid shit.
Yeah. 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 And it feels like it feels like a mini self-betrayal to say words that don't matter
Yeah,
or that I don't mean. And
absolutely.
I think that's what I mean about the integrated emotion and verbal systems. Yeah. Of it feels it feels really artificial. It feels like paper. It feels like that's the image coming to my mind when I'm saying words that I don't mean.
Yeah, so it feels really thin and flimsy.
Mhm.
Not a
Mhm.
lot for it to stand on. It's not
Mhm.
sturdy. Yeah, I think that makes sense, because I've said it, I know we all think this and say this a lot, but just the inability to have that small talk because of how torturous it can feel to be trapped
Mhm.
in that conversation, or it's just like, do we really have to
Mhm.
have pleasantries to like have a conversation? I don't see the point of it, and it's so challenging. And
Mhm.
I also know how often and I'm generalizing, can come across as rude or dismissive, or
Mhm.
like we just
Yeah.
don't care.
Yeah.
And there's a part of that, like, I just don't care. Like,
I was
there's
gonna say
part of
part of that's true. Yeah.
it's true. Like, I don't
Yeah.
fucking care. But like, it's not because I
Mhm.
don't care about the person. It's just
Yeah.
the amount of mental gymnastics my brain has to do in order to have the conversation isn't
Mhm.
worth it to me.
Yeah. Yeah. I like that distinction of it's not that I don't care about the person. It's just this isn't feeling it doesn't feel like I'm contacting the person, so I don't care about this.
Yeah.
Now, if it's a conversation where it feels like there's true contact or encounter, um, then it feels different.
Yeah. And then you'll see the energy level change drastically,
Mhm.
and the engagement too, opposed to like the mentally or very obviously checked out, like,
Mhm.
how do I get out of this conversation?
So, do allistic people feel like they're contacting each other through small talk? Because that would be like, if they are, then it's like I have empathy for them of like, oh, no wonder they do this strange thing.
Yeah. I guess we should have some holistic people on, ask them, because I can't answer that. I have no idea.
Yeah.
Uh,
That would be actually amazing. Like, I feel like I heard this is not my idea. I know someone else had this idea that I am borrowing it from, but like interview an allistic. Like there needs to be some way of like calling up your allistic person, be like, is this an allistic thing?
like a little concierge service that you
Yeah.
have in your life.
Yeah.
Yeah. I really do want to know that, because like, does this actually satisfy and feel like connection, or does this
Mhm.
feel like expectation, but that it doesn't bother you enough to have this like very transactional conversation?
Well, I've seen it somewhere in some study that they get dopamine from it.
Hmm.
So I mean, that's cool.
And I appreciate that you mentioned like I have empathy then, because
Yeah.
I think that just sounds so exhausting. Um,
Right, right. I would love to experience small talk as an allistic person just to understand like what other people are getting out of it because I can't understand it.
yeah, I think we could also cir- segue into eventually like top down versus bottom up thinking too,
Yeah.
and
Yeah.
like, hey, do people really think this way? And it's like, well,
Huh.
yeah, I mean, clearly they do, uh,
Mhm.
but I don't, and
Mhm.
I think that the small talk thing is challenging. And I think when we're trying to name emotions, if I was to name an emotion around small talk, I would say it's like irritation, frustration, but it's visible because
Mhm.
I'm like not good at my wife would say that I'm not good at fixing my face, but if I want to get out of something, I'm gonna make it very clear that I want to
Yeah.
get out of something.
Huh.
Like I'm like looking for the exit point and
Same.
like backing away physically, or like whatever the case.
Uh-huh.
And someone's like, what the fuck is happening? But I can't do it.
I'm a little bit more discreet than you. It sounds like I get claustrophobic. Like my feeling, I would feel claustrophobic. It starts to feel a little bit disassociative for me, not on like large scale, but just like that kind of subtle fogging out. Um, it kind of feels like I'm like telling myself what to do and walking through like, okay, no, da, da, da. So I feel really trapped.
Yeah.
But it takes me a while before I'll get to the point of backing off and leaving.
Oh yeah, I try to do a better job, but I have such a hard time because it,
Hmm.
it really does become like this visceral
Yeah.
physiological reaction where I'm like,
Oh, totally.
I got to get out of this.
Yeah. Yeah.
This is torture. So,
Uh-huh.
um, yeah, we need
Yeah.
to do some further exploration of like, I would like to have holistic people on to ask these questions to. Uh,
Hmm.
I want to
Hmm.
know like if it really feels satisfying to be like, hey, how's your day going? How's the weather? Like, how was work?
Hmm.
All the questions that like make me just cringe and want to crawl out of my skin.
Hmm. Yeah, we should find an allistic person to come on. Um, if you're listening and you're allistic and you want to come be our spokesperson for all allistic people.
I have a perfect person in mind. My partner in hosting a lot of my retreats is the exact opposite.
Hmm.
Neurotypical, bubbly as hell, happy all the fucking time. And I'll say this to Jennifer's face. And if you listen to this episode, I love you. Um, but like in the morning in Ireland, like wants to make small
Hmm.
talk. And I'm just
Hmm.
like staring at her like, she's like, are you okay? I said, Jen, I
Oh
really
my
just,
gosh, let's have her on.
yeah,
I
I
love
just
that. Ask an
want to
allistic.
have
That'll be
this
the
conversation.
title. Yeah.
That'll be good. I'm going to, as soon
Let's
as we
wait
get
till
off here,
okay, but we should wait till we're live so that people who are listening to this can also put in their questions.
right. Okay. That's fair.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think that's a
Yeah.
great idea. I think we can make some captions for Insta, just asking questions that people want answered
Yeah.
because I really want these answers.
Yeah. What do you
Yeah,
want to know from an allistic? I really do too. Or there's sometimes where I'm like, I think this is an autistic thing, but like I don't know.
right.
And so there's some things of like, is this a normal human thing or is this an autistic thing? Um, yeah.
I think it sounds fantastic. So, um, yeah, it's something to be curious about. And I again, just circling back, if you're listening and you're realistic and you're having any sort of emotion around what we're talking about, we don't mean any disrespect by any means, but I think that it would be nice
Mhm.
to know the complete different perspective in terms of how you
Mhm.
move through the world. Because I personally was thinking about like sending emails and how I have to like I want to get right to this point,
Oh
and
yeah.
then I have to like circle back and
Hmm.
I had to like,
Hmm.
hey, how are you? And it's always like, hope you're doing well. Then pulp,
Yeah. Yeah.
um,
So
emoji,
this okay,
information, like
totally. This is total rabbit trail. So I know we're both in the creator space and there's a lot of thoughts about chat GPT. And I don't want to get into that, but here's a thought I've had. I think chat GPT, if used well, can really increase accessibility for autistic people. So for example, something I've done a few times is I'll put in an email and be like, hey, this is the email I want to write. And I don't always use it. And if I use it at all, I'm manipulating it quite a bit, but just seeing an example of like, this is what a business email should look like,
right,
has been so helpful because without a lot of autistic people, we need to see a visual example to really understand it.
yeah,
So that's one way that I've been using ChatGPT and that I'm encouraging some people, depending on their context, of like, if you don't know how to write that email, throw it in ChatGPT, tell them who you're sending it to, at least just to get a sample. Um, but that I think ChatGPT, one thing it does is it translates autistic to allistic speech.
yeah. That's a great idea. I had never thought about using it that way. I've just been using it to like write marketing emails, and I had it write a 20-page kids book for me just to see if it could. It's
Yeah, I think we hopped on right after you had
ridiculous,
done that. Yeah.
um, world changing stuff, honestly. But that is such a good idea because I think about the emotional labor that goes into trying to
Mhm.
communicate in an eldest
Yeah.
neurotypical world,
Mhm.
and how much like questioning and self doubt and
Mhm.
stress and frustration and overwhelm goes into communication. And it can be the simplest stuff. And I think it feels so freeing when you can just be like, here's the point, like here,
Mhm.
I'm sending it to you because that's what I
Yeah.
need to cross.
Yeah. 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 And I've started to send more emails that way too. Like there's sometimes where I will put in the effort to make it sound more allistic, but I've started just sending more direct.
Yeah.
Um, the other thing I've started doing, this one's harder for me. As a kid, I definitely had surface level dyslexia, and I'm seeing it now that I have that lens. I'm like, oh, I see it. Like I'll misspell words, or I have a lot of grammar errors, but also like I'll spell a word that I wasn't meaning to spell. Um, and I used to get really obsessive in looking through my emails for all grammar errors. At this point, I probably get 100 emails a day. So like
Yeah.
I can't do that. So it's like either I don't respond or I'm going to be sending off like grammatically incorrect emails. And so that's something I'm doing, of like getting more comfortable sending off imperfect emails.
I like that. I sometimes mess my emails up like purposefully to
Oh.
ex some of that rigidity and perfectionism that shows up.
Mhm.
To be like, send it. Like
Mhm.
what's the world here? And 99% of the time people don't say anything. 1% of the time someone's like, oh, you spelled this wrong. And like, well, I guess
Mhm.
you're probably not someone that we're gonna work together with. I was thinking, I don't want to diverge too much right now, but I was thinking about like holistic um business meetings at work. Like I
Mhm.
used to be in leadership and I felt like we just had meetings to have meetings to have meetings,
Oh
and I
yeah. Oh my
really
gosh.
enjoyed
So
the fact
physically
I
painful.
had 5 meetings scheduled today about the same thing that could
Yeah.
be just like talked about and figured out in
Mhm.
10 minutes, but yet I spent 7 hours doing this. And I remember years ago I asked the meeting coordinator, I'm like, do you just enjoy scheduling these things so that you can just sit here and like socialize and connect with people all day? Because we are talking about the same fucking thing over and over. There is a
Mhm.
solution. We've come to it. Why are we still here? And she just looked at me like, what is wrong with you? Why would you say that to me? But I couldn't handle it anymore. I just can't get behind that.
Uh-uh. Yeah. I think that's one reason I work for myself, is meetings are so painful. Talk about the physical pain that you sometimes describe. When
Yeah.
I'm in a meeting, I feel a lot of like physical discomfort. I'm often trying to I'll often be sketching out a to-do list, but my brain has to be productive if it's a pointless meeting,
Yeah,
because it's so aggravating in my body.
for sure. When I hold staff meetings for my group practice, I have a bullet point list and I'm just like boom, 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 like
Mm,
get this done. I don't want to sit here for an hour. And
mm,
I yeah,
yeah.
we need to have this episode for sure. I want to have her on and I want to know these thoughts about like what feels commonplace, what feels like very typical, what feels
Mhm.
like very comfortable, and what feels uncomfortable about all of this stuff.
Yeah. Oh my gosh, I'm so excited for this episode.
She's gonna be the perfect person because Jennifer is the epitome of like, yeah, everything we're talking about right now. Perfect person.
We could do a mini series. We could do Ask an Allistic. Here's the other thing I'd be curious about is ask an ADHDer, someone who we know is not also autistic, and then
Right.
ask an autistic, someone who is autistic and not ADHD.
Mm.
Because I'm also always like, is this ADHD? Is this autism?
Yeah,
And we could have a like
I like
ask,
this.
ask the Allistic, ask the ADHDer, ask the autistic.
Okay, we're gonna do this. For all of you listening, if you've been listening so far, please send us your questions. We want to have them answered from different perspectives and different neurotypes. So, really would like to have these conversations, and hopefully they can be illuminating to some of us, including ourselves.
Hmm. Hmm.
So, emotions are challenging, like we've talked about. I think that Megan's brought up a lot of good points for me to consider too, and in terms of the way I've been thinking about things. And I do think to continue having these conversations around how emotions show up and how you can express yourselves without having to name your feelings, because I think that is a really important part of this too.
Sorry, I'm just having a moment and I could be totally wrong. Did we hit record?
Yeah, yeah, we did.
We did. I'm sorry. I just want to know. I'm like, I don't remember.
We're trying to record on a Saturday today to batch some recordings. I think we're at our limit. So
You said something and my brain went off on like, did we hit record? I think you said something nice. I'm sorry. I don't know how to respond because I missed it.
Mm. So think
Sorry,
we're
I
at the
totally ruined it.
awkward transition point where we don't know how to say goodbye. And
Oh, yes.
all of you listening to the Divergent Conversations podcast, new episodes out every single week on all major platforms. Like, download, subscribe, and share. Goodbye.